Let's begin with the basics, not with hype, not with utopia, just with one question. What does it mean to flourish? In ancient Greece, Aristotle had an answer. He called it eudaimonia, a term often mistranslated as happiness, but that's not quite right. Eudaimonia means something deeper. It means human flourishing, living in alignment with your nature as a rational, social, and conscious being. It's not a mood, it's a mode of existence. It's not about pleasure, it's about wholeness. It's what happens when your life is functioning as it should, when you're becoming who you're capable of being. Aristotle argued that every human action ultimately aims at some good, and that all those goods ultimately point toward the highest good, a life well lived, a life of virtue, reflection, community, and self-actualization. That's eudaimonia. It's not imposed, it's not purchased, it's cultivated. And here's the core truth. For thousands of years, civilization has failed to deliver the minimum conditions to make that possible for most people. We've been stuck behind the bleachers of history, watching the starting line of real human freedom from a distance we were never allowed to cross. That changes now. This is the foundation of the doctrine of eudaimonia, and it is the beating heart of the way of the mantle. This is not abstract theory. This is the beginning of a new enlightenment, a scientific animist framework for how we build a civilization where flourishing is not a luxury, but a systemic default. Here's what that means. We begin with the first principle of scientific animism. Life is not accidental. It is patterned, emergent, sacred, not in the supernatural sense, but in the systemic one. Life is what emerges when matter self-organizes against entropy. Consciousness is what happens when life reflects on itself. Meaning is what emerges when consciousness flourishes. And entropy, the tendency of all things to break down, is the enemy of that process. So let's be clear. Entropy is the tyranny. It's not just physics. It's not just heat death in the abstract. It's the collapsing bridges, the dead oceans, the isolation, the burnout, the despair. Entropy is what kills momentum, potential, and meaning. The doctrine of eudaimonia exists to counteract that, not with fantasy, but with infrastructure. That infrastructure starts at the biological level. The hedonistic imperative, proposed by David Pearce, shows us that involuntary suffering is not a necessary part of consciousness. Pain can be edited out. We have the tools, but eliminating pain is just the baseline, the floor. No one is meant to live in agony, but that alone doesn't create a life worth living. The doctrine of eudaimonia picks up where Pearce left off. We ask, once we remove unnecessary suffering, what do we build in its place? The answer isn't pleasure. The answer is flourishing. And that brings us to the extropian principle, the idea that the universe trends towards disorder unless we push back, that we can resist entropy with intelligence, adaptability, and transformation. But again, progress for its own sake is not the goal. Growth without direction is just acceleration into chaos, so we give it direction. We define progress as whatever increases the structural capacity for flourishing. That's the measure. Not GDP, not expansion, but not control, but agency, depth, becoming. Eudaimonia becomes the sovereign science of civilization. And here's where it crystallizes. This isn't a vague dream of utopia. Utopia is not the end, it's the beginning. It's the bare minimum of a functioning system, a world without coercion, without manufactured scarcity, without infrastructural authoritarianism. Once we reach that line, we're not done. We're finally free to begin. Because flourishing cannot be imposed. It must be possible. It must be structurally supported. It must be enabled by a system that honors sovereignty of the self as a sacred principle. The way of the mantle is that system. It is Enlightenment socialism engineered for the post-scarcity age. Cities built not for hierarchy, but for interconnection. Infrastructure designed to liberate. Automation structured to eliminate economic anxiety. Governance reduced to coordination and consent. A world where you can live without asking permission to be who you are. And the doctrine of eudaimonia becomes our design blueprint. It tells us how to measure ethical action, scientific progress, and systemic health. Not by ideology, not by tradition, but by asking one question. Does this increase the capacity for flourishing? That's it. If the answer is yes, it is just. If the answer is no, it must be redesigned. And flourishing, remember, is not soft. It's not indulgence. It's resilience. It's an adaptation, depth of character, connection, growth. It's people doing what they're here to do without being shackled by fear, by hunger, by hatred, or by systems that treat them like tools. This is the civilizational pivot. This is what we've been trying to articulate for millennia. From Aristotle's eudaimonia to the Enlightenment's liberty to the transhumanist vision of redesign to scientific animism's sacred duty of life preservation to the mantle's vow to fight entropy at every scale. It all converges here. Flourishing is not the reward for surviving the system. It is the system. That's the doctrine of eudaimonia. That's the sovereign science of becoming. And it starts now.